Comrades and friends, the workers, toilers, and youth of the Indian subcontinent must assume, alongside their class brethren around the world, a frontline role in the struggle against imperialist war. Since the US seized on the never explained events of September 11, 2001 to invade Afghanistan, South Asia, and the Indian Ocean region have been drawn ever more deeply into the maelstrom of imperialist geopolitics and global great power struggle. From the standpoint of the strategists of US imperialism, South Asia is the soft underbelly of Eurasia, crucial to protecting US power towards energy-rich Middle East and Central Asia and across the Himalayas at China. The Pentagon war planners view dominance of Indian Ocean, which a recent US Naval War College study has emphasized, replace the North Atlantic as the central artery of world commerce, as pivotal to US global hegemony. First and foremost, because it is at the heart of US plans to impose an economic blockade on China through strategic choke points in the event of a war or a war crisis. But also because the Indian Ocean is considered essential to US military operations in the Middle East and East Africa. Washington's drive to expand its military strategic presence across the region is now a mighty factor in the internal political life and class dynamics of every country in South Asia, from tiny Maldives to the rival nuclear-armed states of India and Pakistan. The US occupation of Afghanistan is now in its 15th year. Pakistan's military, with Washington's encouragement and blessing, has once again muscled aside the country's civilian government and is waging war in the country's tribal regions, occupying its principal city Karachi, and now embarking on military operations in Punjab, its most populous province. Last year, Sri Lanka's President Mahinda Rajapaksa fell victim to a regime change operation made in Washington. The US orchestrated defection of a leading minister of Rajapaksa's government, Maithripala Sirisena, and his subsequent nomination as the so-called common opposition candidate for the presidency. The US had backed Rajapaksa to the hilt as he waged civil war against the country's Tamil minority. What it would not tolerate, however, was his attempt to balance between Washington and Beijing. Within months of Rajapaksa's ouster, John Kerry was making the first ever visit of a US Secretary of State to Sri Lanka, and soon after, the Colombo agreed to a US-Sri Lanka partnership dialogue. But it is India that is the linchpin of US drive to harness South Asia to its drive for world hegemony. By virtually any measure, India is a poor country, with 3/4 of the population eking out an existence on less than $2 per day. But for Washington, it is a strategic price. The head of US Pacific Command, Admiral Harry Harris, recently declared himself moonstruck by the opportunities a strategic partnership with India provides US imperialism. He then went on to call for joint US-Indian naval patrols in the South China Sea. In the Indian bourgeoisie, Washington has a willing accomplice. The venal Indian bourgeoisie hopes to realize its own great power ambitions by serving as a US satrap. The 2-year-old government of Narendra Modi and his Hindu supremacist BJP is transforming India into a frontline state in the US war drive against China. It parrots Washington's false narrative that China is the aggressor in the South China Sea and has begun to co-develop new weapon systems with Pentagon and is also expanding bilateral and trilateral ties with US principal allies in the Indo-Pacific region, Japan and Australia. Last month, the BJP government announced its agreement in principle to a pact with Washington that will throw open India's military bases and ports to US planes and ships for refueling, resupply and recuperation. In South Asia, as around the world, US imperialism is acting with extreme recklessness, throwing gasoline on a region that is riven with ethnic, communal and caste conflicts, the bitter legacy of colonial rule and the bloody communal partition of the subcontinent into Muslim Pakistan and Hindu India that the rival wings of the emerging national bourgeoisie implemented in 1947. Buoyed by Washington's support, the Modi government is aggressively asserting India's long-standing claim to be the regional hegemon, imposing a 5-month blockade on Nepal, bullying the Maldives into declaring India its most important friend, instructing the Indian military to make Pakistan pay for alleged border violations with incommensurable losses. Pakistan, for its part, has repeatedly warned that the US lavishing of weaponry and weapon systems on India has overturned the region's balance of power. With Washington blithely ignoring these warnings, Islamabad is now deploying tactical battlefield nuclear weapons. Among the masses of South Asia, as around the world, there is mass opposition to war, but no anti-war movement. In Sri Lanka, the pseudo-left supported the US regime change operation, touting the lie that Sirisena, who had been a crony of Rajapaksa until only weeks before the presidential election, was the candidate of democracy. The Indian Stalinists have played the pivotal role in politically suppressing the rapidly expanding Indian working class. Over the past quarter century, the communist parties and their left front friends have supported a successive of governments intent on making India a cheap labor haven for world capital and a strategic partner of Washington. Now the Stalinists are using the crimes of BJP, its promotion of communal reaction and US-based agreement as the excuse for subordinating the working class even more completely to the Indian bourgeoisie and its state, to argue for an even more explicit alliance with the Congress party, that is, with the Indian bourgeoisie's traditional party of the government and the party that over the past quarter century has done most of the heavy lifting of implementing pro-investor restructuring and forging of Indo-US alliance. The entire history of South Asia over the past century demonstrates the utterly reactionary character of all such alliances with the supposed progressive or democratic faction of the bourgeoisie and the urgency of the working class adopting the program of permanent revolution. Imperialist oppression, chronic poverty, caste and communal discrimination, none of the burning problems facing the masses can be resolved other than through a working class-led socialist revolution. Social opposition is growing. Last week, a leading Indian newspaper expressed alarm at the sudden eruption of mass protests by poorly paid garment workers in Bangalore. What so shocked and troubled the commentator was that this militant protest erupted outside the existing trade unions and political structures. The crucial question is to arm the incipient rebellion of the workers around the world with the program and perspective that articulates their objective interest as a global class and protagonist of the new social order, free of want and war. On this May Day, I urge workers and youth across South Asia and around the world to join our World Party.